Recording. Great. So, greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. And today I am very happy to welcome a dear friend of me and of all of us. So, this is Erik, or some of us might know him as the Asian movie enthusiast, for that is the name of his really great YouTube channel, Asian movie enthusiast. And we have Erik, the man himself, here today with us. So welcome, Erik. It's so nice to see you again, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. How are you doing these days, by the way?
Doing pretty good. Pretty good. I'm getting a lot of movie viewings in this year, and things are going pretty well, actually, considering.
Oh, it's great. And are you watching? So when you say you're getting a lot of movie watching in, how many movies are you finding yourself watching these days? What's your schedule like in terms of movie watching?
Well, I am fortunate enough to be able to work from home a little bit. So, I don't have a lot of commute time or anything like that going on. So I actually have a little bit more time than usual. So I'm watching movies basically every day, on a pretty consistent basis, maybe one or two. And plus, I usually stay up late anyway. I usually don't go to bed until about midnight. So I usually have time at nighttime for one or two flicks.
And are these films that you haven't seen before, or are these rewatches? What's the general ratio or mix of that for you these days?
It's a nice mix. I think in general, I watch new, like first time viewings, I guess I could say, over repeats. A lot of my repeat viewings are usually for reviews on my channel or movies that I just haven't seen in a while that I'm getting the itch to rewatch. But I'm trying to gobble up as many first time viewings as I can.
Speaking of your channel, of course, you have the really great and just the so popular channel, Asian Movie Enthusiast, and I think that is such a great source for many people with regard to cinema of many parts of Asia, right? So this is a really great area of YouTube, and you really talk about many of these films, a lot of these films. You talk about them all with wonderful enthusiasm, hence the name enthusiast, and you talk about them with great, of course, passion and intelligence, and you're really championing a lot of these. So I really want to thank you so much for that. I do want to ask you, so how long have you been doing the channel Asian Movie Enthusiast, and what was the impetus or the background behind getting the channel up and running in the first place?
Yeah, I've been doing it for about 5 years now, actually. It'll be 5 years at the end of this year, I believe. And my initial kind of inspiration really was the fact that, I used to have a lot of discussions about message or on message boards and that regarding Asian films. But on YouTube, there were and are like a handful of people that cover them. But I felt like there more coverage could be I guess achieved in some ways. So I'm like, well, I can tap into some stuff that maybe a lot of people aren't talking about, give some additional exposure to some of these industries and these movies. And I have a lot of weaknesses in my movie watching, a lot of like holes and stuff like that from countries from all over the world. But one of my advantages is that I have seen at least a pretty good number of films from like Japan, South Korea, Hong Kong, mainland China, and then some of the Southeast Asian countries. So I'm like, well, how do I kind of use that to my advantage on YouTube? So I kind of came up with the structure of my channel that way, where I would have kind of like high level reviews or high level list videos and stuff like that, and try to get out as many recommendations for films that I think are good as possible. And, kind of try to fill that gap between, the coverage of Asian films on YouTube and the coverage of like the popular Hollywood stuff, just kind of fill it a little bit.
It, this is one of the really just this is one of the one of many fascinating aspects and facets of your background and character and real presence, which we all admire very much, is your great passion for this area of cinema. And so, and of course, it's a very vast one, and it has many. It covers, of course, many genres and uh, uh, many sort of modes of cinema. Many filmmakers, of course, are present here, and you have so many films of this nature that run a wide range in terms of subject matter and the like. So, could you just give us an indication or a little bit of a primer, if you will, in with respect to your film journey? And it's something that I ask all of my guests, and I'm so curious about what were therefore some of those films that you discovered early on growing up that you would consider to be what I like to call landmark moments or milestone moments in your own film journey education, such that you look at those films now and you think they really formed a large component of the person, the film enthusiast person that you are today. So, what were some of those landmark films for you growing up?
Yeah, it was my history is a little bizarre. It's almost kind of like very limited exposure to Asian films when I was younger. So I would do what most people would do. You'd see some Bruce Lee films on TV or something. You'd see some Godzilla films on TV. And some kung fu stuff occasionally, but that was basically it for my childhood. And then I got a little bit older, and obviously with the international popularity of people like Jackie Chan, Jet Li, Chow Yun Fat, I got into their stuff when everybody else was getting into it. So I still wasn't really like a big enthusiast yet, but it wet my palate a little bit, and I got into some of it. The big kind of time period was right around like 2004, 2005, when you got a more of an influx of DVD availability at the local video stores like Blockbuster, specifically related to the Asian horror films that were coming out, and the distribution improved quite a bit on those in the mid 2000s. So I started getting into those, and the big films for me, the big one I would say is Pulse from Kiyoshi Kurosawa, simply because I just sat down to watch it. It's a horror film. You know what I mean? I've always been a fan of horror films as a kid, so I'll watch a horror film from anywhere. And when I was watching it, it really kind of hit me hard in that I'd never seen anything remotely like it in my entire life. It moves as slow as molasses in January. It's like an art house style film. And I was totally absorbed from like start to finish. So, my reaction was like, where has this been my whole life at this point? And then that just like opened the floodgates to basically everything. Because I feel like when you could sit down and watch a film that's like that particular kind of a niche style and you really love it, you could basically watch anything now. So I started going back and watching classic films from Japan and a whole bunch of horror films. So that was a big one. And A Tale of Two Sisters was a big one from South Korea. And then the cheesy action film So Close from Hong Kong was big for me because that got me into like the girls with guns stuff, which kind of I parlayed that into a bunch of other Hong Kong stuff. So those were kind of like the three big ones.
And this is really great because what so were you therefore how should I put it? Were you therefore essentially relying on the DVD companies back in the day, as you say, early 2000s, and what they were releasing, or were you basically looking up things, finding out things, getting information from wherever source you could, and then trying to hunt those down? And what was the process that you found in terms of your own film discovery during this period? Was it more just what is it? What's the phrase? Just buying things and seeing what they were, or was it finding out things beforehand, researching, or maybe it was a combination of both?
Yeah, well, it started off basically limited at my local, video store. It was a Blockbuster, and I would just start chewing through as many movies as I could find there that were especially horror films, but any South Korean or Japanese or Chinese film I could find. And then after a while, I basically chewed through their whole selection. So I'm like, well, now what do I do? And then I started doing the online rental services like Netflix has started to transition to, where they would send the DVDs in the mail. And I still have my Netflix DVD mail service subscription, which is quite helpful. And after that, or I guess in conjunction with that, we did have a few websites in the US that focused on Asian films. There was ehit.com and sinflix.com, neither of which exist anymore. But they had the Netflix model of sending DVDs in the mail, and like their entire libraries would be like Asian movies. So I would have access really to a lot of Asian films when they got their DVD releases in their home countries. And I could just, really chew through a lot of those. So that's where it really hit big, was those services, Netflix. And in terms of identifying the films, I would basically use them. I would sort it by like genre, like Hong Kong action films would just fill my queue with a bunch of them, or like Japanese horror films, just fill my queues with them. There was also pretty good coverage though back then. Like there was a website called Snowblood Apple, which still exists. They did like a bunch of reviews on Asian horror films, get some recommendations from them. Midnight Eye is still a big website, even though they stopped updating recently. I would get a bunch of recommendations from them. So you'd hit a nice mix of stuff. It was a mix of research and like just blind watching stuff.
Could you let us know from your own perspective? So, what is it about these this area of cinema, or these places of cinema that you cited as examples? What is it about, say, South Korean cinema or Hong Kong cinema, or right, as examples? What is it, do you think, for you, about these particular areas of cinema that you think are the reasons why they sing to you as strongly and as potently as they do? Do you think you can identify a few examples or factors as to why exactly that is the case from your perspective?
Yeah, well, I think over time I've learned that even though every movie industry in the world is going to make their good movies and they're going to make their bad films, sometimes they'll do things a little bit better than each other. And they each have a very distinct style and themes and stuff like that. So if you take, for example, romantic comedies, I started watching some South Korean romantic comedies back in the day. I'm, never really a huge fan of them, and just the execution of them and the style. I'm a big fan of some of the actresses out there, and it all just kind of hit. And I started just watching tons of Korean romantic comedies, which I never really thought I would be that interested in until you actually experienced it. And I think for them, it was like the combination of just the really strong female leads, as well as some of the unique ideas they had in them. But there was a film called Couples from 2011 that was a remake of a Japanese film called Stranger of Mine from 2005. And that's a film where you have a bag of cash and it exchanges hands, and it's like a changing perspective film, like a mystery. And South Korea took that and kind of infused a romantic comedy element into it. So like stuff like that really hits me big when it's something that's that unique and kind of well made. And it's the same with Japan's, horror films. A lot of them have very unique, interesting kind of ideas in them. Like Kiyoshi Kurosawa's films are kind of philosophical horror films, really. So that kind of hit me big. Never saw anything like it. And then obviously you have Hong Kong action flicks from like the 80s and 90s that just, those are like made on a completely different planet. Stuff like, Miracle Fighters and all these, crazy action flicks. So it's a combination of getting something a little different as well as like the execution, I think.
And this is really great, Eric. This is really great because, well, I guess it leads me to my next question, which is, you are also very, I guess you watch a lot of physical media, and then you watch a lot of films on streaming, and also on demand, and that those sorts of subscription services, correct?
Correct.
And so, what is the state of your physical media collection at the moment? How approximately how many titles would you say that you have currently?
Probably, it's definitely over 1,000, which is actually not that large compared to a lot of collectors, but it is a significant collection. And the vast majority of them are like non-American films, like from the countries I typically review on my channel, the Asian stuff. And the thing is, though, like I don't really have a choice. Like I can't make that complete transition to streaming because if I look at my collection a lot of times, even when I'm picking out a movie to review on my channel, if I do a separate review, I want it to be kind of available for people to see if I dedicate a whole video to it. So I'll pick out a movie from my collection and be like, oh, I'll review this. But let me check the availability first. No streaming availability at all. Maybe the DVD's kind of out of print. So I'm like, well, maybe I'll have to review a different one. That happens a lot. So if I made the complete transition to streaming, I wouldn't even be able to watch like a bunch of the movies in my collection, which is, a little bit scary.
And this, oh, and but you still, of course, rely on streaming to a certain degree, as you indicated. So, what do you think? What for you? What is the ratio between your reliance on physical media versus your reliance on streaming in terms of your current film consumption?
I would say it's a pretty nice mix for newer movies. It's probably even more predominantly streaming because that's where kind of like the industry and availability is going. So a lot of times I'll watch stuff streaming on Netflix or Amazon Instant or Amazon Prime or whatever. And then if I really like the movie, then I'll try to get it on physical media. But in terms of older flicks, a lot of times I have to go to the physical media in my collection or maybe even rent it. There's actually some movies on the Netflix DVD rental service that isn't available or they're hard to find in like other streaming services, which is really weird. So it's a nice mix there, I think.
Ah, that's really great. And I think I see a number of really, really just exciting box sets behind you.
Yes.
And some look to be, based on my own knowledge, which I admit is very limited, some of which seem to be very limited or very rare themselves, being out of print perhaps, or not available in terms of first run releases. So well done. I noticed that there is a good mix of, say, Asian films, Japanese films, for example, and also non-Asian films, so horror films. So it looks like you are getting ready for a little bit of the Halloween season. Is that correct?
Oh yes, yes, big time. Yeah, I do a back on the IMDb horror board. They used to have the October challenge. So you watch like 31 horror films at least, and at least like 16 of them have to be first time viewing. So I'm going to knock out my first time viewing requirement with the Universal Monster set back there, which I've only seen like half a dozen of those. So I'm really interested. I'm going to chew through all of them this October. I'm really looking forward to that.
Did you get the Gamera set, by the way?
Yes, yes, I
Yes.
did.
Could I ask you?
Phenomenal.
Oh, great. Yeah. So it's really great, actually, is it not? Yeah. Arrow is really doing some phenomenal, outstanding work. I mean, they've always been doing so, but their work on that set in particular was mind blowing.
But yeah,
I'm still, even with all the commentary tracks, we spoke a little bit about some in particular off camera, but they're just phenomenal. Uh, are there? Let's see. I guess, are there any specific filmmakers at the moment that you are particularly keen on in terms of their works and their overall filmographies?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm a big Shinya Tsukamoto fan, so I kind of wait with bated breath every, like, 3-4 years before before he releases his next film. And then I still follow Kiyoshi Kurosawa as much as I can, given his sometimes the availability of his films sometimes are hit or miss. I like Tetsuya Nakashima, who did Confessions and World of Kanako, and recently It Comes. So he's I always wait for his stuff. In Korea, um, there's Hong Jin Na, I think his name is, who did The Chaser, Yellow Sea, and The Wailing. So anytime he comes out with a flick, I'm ready to roll on that. And there's various Korean directors I follow. And then in Hong Kong, Johnny To is my favorite. I wasn't real big on his last film, Three, but anytime he releases a film, I'm all over it. So those are kind of like some of the big ones off the top of my head.
Yeah, we spoke, I guess, for example, we spoke a little bit about another great arrow set, which was, I mean, you mentioned his name off the top there, Tsukamoto, Shinya Tsukamoto. And you have the set there. I have it right here. And that's another great one. It's not complete, but it's certainly great for what it is, which is quite intense. Could you tell us? I guess we have the box sets, and we're speaking about arrows. So, just in your own words, what is it about Tsukamoto's work that particularly sings to you, and why was it his name that you said first out of all of those great names? I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's kind of actually my analogy would be remember the end of Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield, the flick from the '80s. Well, at the end of the film, he does the triple Lindy or whatever, where he does that ridiculous dive, and that's what I think Tsukamoto does, where he does really good quality stuff, but it's so outrageous and outlandish at some aspects, but he nails it anyway. So that's really what kind of speaks to me for him. He, I mean, all of his films, you can't really classify them by like a real basic genre. Even like A Snake of June, you could say is it's an erotic thriller, but saying that really does the film a disservice. There's so much going on there, and it's so unique and captivating. Or even something like Nightmare Detective 2, which some people consider to be more of a mainstream film, but I think it's just really has some fantastic scenes of suspense and really interesting stuff going on there. And then lately, he's been doing a lot of I don't know about kind of like I guess contemplations on war and things like that, with Fires on the Plain and even recently Killing. So he's constantly kind of adapting his style, being a little different, and a lot of I try to watch a lot of weird movies, just because when you consume a lot of movies, you need that mix. I need some weird stuff. But I found that he's really kind of my favorite. Basically, he's my favorite director. Period. Just because he can do the weird stuff, but keep me interested and provoke my thought instead of just kind of annoying me, which some other guys can do.
Oh, what? And while we're on the topic, so what in particular are some of the works of Tsukamoto that you would recommend to people to watch?
Well, his most popular film, in my opinion, is Tetsuo the Iron Man, which is quite insane. But I would also say that he has a nice mix of stuff. So I love Vital with Tadanobu Asano. That to me, I classify it as a romance, and it's phenomenal. Just so different for like a romantic film. And then I would say A Snake of June is fantastic. And then Tokyo Fist is huge. Like Tokyo Fist might be his most dense film in terms of themes. There's a lot to chew on in that movie, man. And then possibly Gemini would be another one, because that really has a nice contemplation of kind of like higher classes, lower classes, even though the film's set in the early 1900s. And again, very unique film. So you can't when you watch his films, you usually remember them, even if you don't like them.
And what was your take on that arrow set, by the way?
Oh, I thought it
The
was
Solid Nightmares.
Yeah, I thought it was really good. I never even expected a Tsukamoto box set ever from anyone really on Blu-ray, and and it obviously you get a bunch of the movies, and every film has a commentary from like Tom Mess, and he's really really good commentator on those, and every single film you get a commentary, so you can watch all the films. Then you could watch all the films with the commentaries, and they got like behind the scenes stuff and like interviews and all kinds of stuff in there. So I was pretty happy with that.
And according to the commentary track, I forget it was maybe to Tetsuo the Iron Man, perhaps, but please forgive me if I'm mistaken. But he did mention on the commentary track that Tsukamoto apparently, according to his information, right, he owns the rights to all of his films in terms of allowing for licensing out the distribution rights, home media distribution rights. Now, if that's the case, according to the commentary, then that could lead the way, and this was also speculated on such commentary track, that could lead the way also to another Tsukamoto set, because under that assumption, Tsukamoto would own the rights to distribution with regard to the films that aren't included in this particular set. And if that's true, and if sales were good for this particular set, then hopefully that could mean having a second set with the films that weren't included or the works that weren't included in that. So I hope that's true. I don't know. Would you like? I guess I already know the answer to this question, but would you like to see a second Arrow Tsukamoto set with the remaining films?
Oh, definitely, definitely.
Yeah.
I think Nightmare Detective 2 is highly underrated. I think it would be nice to have Hiruko the Goblin in there and some of the other stuff. And they didn't have Gemini in there. I had to get the Mondo Macabre Blu-ray release of that one. So and that's you mentioned it. That's the other interesting thing about Tsukamoto. He produces his films. He's the director. He's the editor, and in a lot of cases, he's the writer, and then he acts in a lot of them. So it's like you're talking like total freaking like personal filmmaking in this aspect, which I really love.
A total Renaissance person uh, in many aspects, and it's a very handmade quality as well. In his, especially in his early films, but even in his later works, there's a real, you can sense his fingerprints, so to speak, all over the works quite distinctly. Oh, that's really fascinating, my friend. And before all this terrible world health crisis stuff that's hitting us now in 2020, sort of before it all emerged and it changed everything. Before that, you would also be doing, where you could, a lot of traveling too from the US to this part of the world. Is that right?
Yes, yes. My first big vacation was way back in like 2003 when I went to Ireland. But
Yeah.
then after that, every vacation has been to Japan because I just can't break away from that particular habit.
So it was always Japan. Were there any other parts of sort of the Asia that you visited, or was it almost always Japan?
It was always Japan.
Always Japan.
Yeah.
Oh, good. What if you don't mind me asking, what was it about Japan in particular that made you want to come back and visit?
I'm kind of a wimp when I'm on vacation. I just want to like relax. I don't want to have to worry about safety. You know what I mean? Very
Yeah.
safe in terms of crime in Japan. Like I can,
Uh,
I've walked around at midnight, just walking around aimlessly, and I feel like safe over there. It's crazy. The food. I'm a food guy. Oh my goodness. Like I save extra cash before I go over there just so I could go nuts on the dinners. Like I always do a kaiseki multiple times, teppanyaki multiple times, and stuff like that. I go nuts. And then there's actually I have a few quick stories you might find amusing in terms of my interaction with some of the people over there. Because obviously, I mean, I don't speak Japanese, very, very tiny amount. And I like to kind of kind of mess with people a little bit in a classy way. So, for example, if I'm out at a, there's one restaurant I like in Kyoto called Kyoto Kicho, which is like a pretty good kaiseki dinner, and I'll be there and I'll have my little book with me. I try not to look at my cell phone when I'm on vacation. So I have a little book, a yokai monster book. It's a fun little book that I read when I'm having dinner. And I'll intentionally flip open the page to the kappa. There's a big picture of a kappa. And, for people who don't know, the kappa is known for, being a little flatulent or, a little stinky, stuff like that. So I'll leave it open, and the waitress will come over very prim and proper, and she'll see the kappa. And I just want to see her reaction. And in some cases, the waitress just kind of breaks down laughing, which I always find very amusing at a restaurant like that. But other times they give it back to me. Like there was another time I was at like a tempura restaurant, and there was a nice couple standing outside, a Japanese couple with a little baby. And before I even went to the restaurant, they're like, "Oh, make sure you enjoy your meal." And I was like, "Oh, well, that was kind of nice." What I didn't realize is that they were feeling guilty because they were bringing the baby in the restaurant. And this is like a really nice tempura place where you have your personal chef and stuff. So that's fine. It's just me and them. So I'm sitting there, and they're at the other chef's table, and the baby gets a little ornery. And I noticed that they would take the baby out of the restaurant every time it would start making noises, So at one time, the husband took the baby out, the mother left, and I waved her down. I'm like, the baby, it's okay. The baby's okay. And she spoke pretty good English. She's like, "Oh, thank you. I'll tell my husband." So she brings the baby back in, she sits it in its crib, and she says in English to the baby, "Now you can scream as much as you want." And I was like, I turned around, I'm like, no, come on. And the chefs and the waitresses are all laughing, at my expense. And there was some other great interaction that night between them. So it's little stuff like that I kind of makes your vacation a little bit.
And this is interesting too, because you're mentioning food and you're mentioning meals at restaurants, and this also is a little nice way into just mentioning for anyone who might be interested that you and I were I had the great honor of meeting you in person, right, in
Yes.
Tokyo, of all places, right, several months back. And we enjoyed it was a sushi restaurant for lunch, if I'm not mistaken.
That is correct.
And we had a nice conversation. I think it was what was the hot topic at that time? I want to say it was maybe around the time that the Criterion Godzilla set was maybe released or about to get released or something like that. And so maybe we were talking about Godzilla films and other. I was getting your thoughts on that and other Asian or Japanese films. And so I think that we did. Is my memory correct on that?
Yes, it was.
Yes.
That was a pretty good sushi place too. I like that place.
Yeah, and it had a nice view of the city, and it was very good service, and it wasn't crowded, and yeah, we had a table by the window, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really great, and you're a very tall person in when you meet in person, so I was amazed by the height difference because I'm not that tall, and so we sat down and we just had a wonderful conversation, and I was so happy to have been able to meet you face to face like that, and just to get your your great takes on a lot of things. Um, and I should ask you, when you would visit Japan, then would it also be an occasion for you, say, to purchase Japanese physical media of films, or is that something that you usually didn't do? in other words, did you purchase a lot of Japanese Blu-ray discs, for example, or do you essentially focus on the, say, North American releases of Asian films and the like?
Yeah, I because uh, I guess some Japanese films are quite limited in their distribution to the U.S. Whenever I would go over there, I would usually, scour the where I usually go now is Book Off. So I'll go to Book Off and I'll check the Japanese movie section, see if I can find some stuff. And I usually come back with some stuff every time I go there. So some of the big, some of my favorite purchases, there was uh, a film called Egg from I think it was Yukihiko Tsutsumi, and it was like a low budget like horror film about a girl who has like a monster in her mind or something like that. And that was a really cool flick that I picked up. There was just this last time I got like a special edition of Azumi that had like a lot of like making of featurettes. Now I can't speak Japanese, but I still got the gist of what was happening. It was really interesting to watch those. I would say, like, actually, the best or most, I guess, valuable acquisition I ever made was not in Japan, but it was online on Amazon Japan. Now, Daisuke, have you ever heard of the Torihara films with Mitsuki Tanimura? Yes. So those films, a few of them were uploaded to YouTube. They're like anthology horror films about stalkers. And a few like segments were uploaded onto YouTube ages ago. And I really wanted to track them all down. And it took me like 8 years to do it. And I finally found on Amazon Japan used all like 8 anthologies. No subtitles, but you can watch those without them. Because it's just, it's about stalkers. And I acquired that, and that was my big acquisition probably of all time, because there's some really neat stuff in those. I wish they would have a box set of those released in the U.S. But when I go to Japan, I go to Book Off. I'd ask them for Torihara, and they never had it. That's why I thought of it.
Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah, yeah, that's I don't own them myself, and so but oh my goodness. So if you ordered them from the US, if you order through Amazon Japan, shippers in Japan, I assume. So I can imagine that usually they can charge a lot in terms of shipping, but I guess it was really worth it, right?
Yeah, I got it really cheap too. It was like
Oh,
5,000 yen for all 8 movies.
oh,
So,
that's great. That is really great. Yeah. So, and do you actually on that point? Do you also do a considerable amount of shopping, say, from Japanese websites like Amazon or Amazon Japan or any other similar websites like that, or is it more purchases through North American websites?
usually North American. I use Yes Asia
Yeah.
when I can't find a movie, streaming, or it doesn't have an American release. I'll try Yes Asian. Maybe I'll get the Hong Kong release will have subtitles, or if I'm really up against the wall, I'll get like a Taiwanese release or something without subs. But Yes Asia is what I use when I'm making a last stand to try to find something.
Yeah, that's a really good site, and that's been around for a long time. And even I remember when I was living in the States many years ago, that was still that was still active, and that was usually my source too for a lot of a lot of my purchases back then. Um, and so because I could get Japanese films okay, but there were some other areas of Asian cinema that I would always try to track down. And so right, that's been around for a while, right? Yes Asia, right? I hope I have that right. It's been around for a long time, has it not?
Yeah, probably 2 decades, I would say.
Yeah, yeah, and so that's I think it was through them, and I hope I'm getting this right. If I remember correctly, it was through them that I was able to get my first first early sort of South Korean, like the Shiri and post Shiri films, during that period when it was really, it became this sudden boom, really, in terms of these high budget like, like films that were really becoming really popular, just all over the place, and they were just growing more and more in popularity because of the huge success of Shiri. And it helped me in terms of my infatuation and admiration for Shim Eun-ha, and which continues to this very day. And so, and I remember I had I got the DVDs, and it was the 1-2 punch of Christmas in August, and Paro Christmas, and Tell Me Something. So we had these two very different films with the same actors playing the main roles, the protagonists, Hansukyu and Shim Eun-ha, but they're vastly different. They're incredibly different, and in fact, they're so different that I think it's a kind of a mind-blowing double feature experience. And so that was my foray into very early, or not early, but it was this period of South Korean cinema was very exciting to me. But yeah, and they're still around too. So that's really great. That is really great. I'm glad that there are sites like that still that are doing such really important work, and that they're really great resources. One of many resources, of course, because a lot of these things are really hard to track down, and they can be quite expensive to try to purchase. So that's really splendid. And are there? I guess the one thing I also wanted to ask you. Again, we're on the topic of we've been talking so far about your sort of passion for Asian cinema. And so, could you tell me, I guess, one thing? And I don't, you don't have to necessarily. I don't mean to ask you for any kind of negative appraisal of, let's say, non-Asian films, like films from the U.S. or something. I don't mean for you to try to go negative on these, unless you want to. But what is it, do you think, for you? What is it, if we're trying to have a kind of comparative analysis at the end of the day? What is it, do you think, if you wanted to compare using whatever comparison points that you wish, what is it, do you think, that is it about, say, certain aspects of Asian cinema versus certain aspects of, say, U.S. cinema? What is it, do you think, in that comparative analysis at the end of the day that makes you want to focus your attention and your energies and your resources and your money to more Asian cinema than to, say, non-Asian cinema? What do you think it is in terms of that comparative analysis for you?
I think one aspect is that since I really wasn't exposed to much of it for like the first 25 years of my life, and that all I watched were English language films, basically. I mean, 99% of the time when I was growing up. So I think I almost feel like I'm catching up on some other on these industries a little bit. There's that aspect to it, and there's certain aspects that I prefer, I guess you could say. Again, the uniqueness is big. I mean, you watch a Hong Kong action flick from the 80s and 90s. I mean, it's hard to find stuff like that anywhere else. In terms of the way the stunts were done in camera. The girls with guns flicks back then were just crazy in terms of the martial arts choreography and stuff. Or, like the Japanese horror films, there's a lot of, I guess, there's a nice variety. But I mean, there's certain aspects that I really like. Like, for example, just take an example, the protagonists. Obviously, American cinema has a wide variety of horror films, but one of the cliches that I don't really like in the American horror industry is just the kind of obnoxious protagonists that you're not really supposed to like much. Whereas in a lot of Japanese horror films, it doesn't happen quite as much. So that would be one example of something that maybe I prefer the Japanese cliche or cliches over maybe the American ones. Or some of the Korean stuff as well. They'll have maybe, I'm trying to think, a little bit more. Well, I tend to find a lot of female-driven films too, a lot more often and easy in Asian cinema, which interests me a lot. So there's certain very peculiar little aspects that kind of string together that kind of keep my interest going, and it hasn't really waned much. So they're definitely doing some stuff over there that's keeping me hooked. Because if I fell out of interest, maybe and I do watch films from America and Italy, a lot of Italian horror and giallo films. So I do mix it up, but still, yeah, my primary focus is on Asia.
Yeah, and just while we're on the topic, I should just let me also uh, mention our mutual friend, Aaron Pinn. I know that you're a dear friend of his, and I'm a big fan of his too. And you mentioned Italian horror and giallo, and the like, and so I know that your channel and his channel have a really close relationship. And so that's really wonderful. And I know that you are involved a lot with his live streams and the like, and you're very involved in that film conversation. So that's great. I guess now that we're on the topic, if you don't mind, what are some examples? Say, let's take it. You mentioned Italian horror. What are some examples of Italian horror films? And it's a wide spectrum. So it could be giallo, it could be more supernatural, it could be depending on the specific subgenre. But could you give us some examples of your favorite Italian horror?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of actually Argento. A lot of our Argento, obviously. Like my big directors, definitely Tsukamoto's up there. Like Argento and Carpenter are up there too. So I like a lot of Argento stuff. I would say that maybe, I mean, obviously Suspiria is big for me. I do like opera quite a bit as well. Tenebra is huge. I'd say Suspiria and Tenebra are my two favorites from him. I also like some of Fulci's stuff. You got some of his more violent stuff like The Beyond, which is really cool. But I also like his earlier giallo stuff. Don't Torture a Duckling, A Lizard in a Woman's Skin. So I like him a lot as well. I think he's even a little bit underappreciated because a lot of people see him for his gore films, but they don't get into the earlier, like maybe more classy or nuanced stuff from him. Martino, I like a lot. Sergio Martino. And then, anything really Italian horror. I can even watch the low grade stuff and get some type of entertainment value out of it, like with Zombie 3 and stuff like that. You know what I mean? It's like I just have a certain affinity for those films, probably because of their atmosphere. Usually, they have a lot of really nice in-camera cinematography and aesthetics and stuff like that that really kind of grab me. So I'm big on the Italian stuff.
Yeah, I am a huge fan of Zombie 3. I love Zombie 3. I think it's one of those. You have to see it to believe it. Everything about it lives in its own law of physics. It's its own. You just have to follow its logic, or just forget about it. And if you do it, it's one of those amazing things that has everything. It has thrills. It has laughs. It has great acting. It has maybe not so great acting. I don't know, but and it has certainly some very interesting, inventive ways of reimagining the zombie living dead aesthetic and physics. So that's great. I'm totally with you with Zombie 3, and so that's I'm so glad you mentioned, for instance, Martino and Fulci, of course. And you're actually right, I think, in terms of a kind of reappraisal. I think Fulci has always been there, but it's always been it's always been right. It's been focusing in on the gore and the real, almost sleazy aspects of the gore, which itself I think is a kind of art that Fulci, I think, achieved so well. And Fulci's gore is much different than, say, Argento's gore. You know what I mean? There's a certain sense of aesthetic style to it. Maybe it's because maybe there, I don't know, in terms of the way the close up is used, or the way that things are lingered upon inexorably, and quite uh, just quite over the top. You know it's going to go one way, and it really goes that way. Argento has this way of I don't know how to explain it, but it's a kind of it's a kind of like splatter sort of thing. Like he's putting paint on the walls, and in some films, like Deep Red or Tenebrae, like actually we're seeing that kind of aesthetic play out in real time. And I don't want to say the scene, but there's some famous scenes that involve this kind of almost painterly aesthetic, almost. So, especially in Tenebrae, as you know. So there's a different approach to the gore. But I'm so glad you mentioned Fulci in that way, because his sort of mystery giallo work. I mean, you've mentioned Don't Torture Duckling, which I think is one of those just it's a very dark and quite challenging and potentially very, very rewarding film, a mystery film that is very intense, and it goes in places that is it's quite shocking in many places, right? So but I'm so glad you mentioned that, the lizard in the woman's skin, etc. So but oh, that's so interesting. What do you think in terms of I mean, you're a horror film fan, and so what do you think in terms of the new recent horror films that are being released in many parts of the world? I mean, I know, for instance, you are a big expert and fan of J horror, and many recent examples of that, say in the past 10 or 20 years or so. But what about some other parts of the world? Do you find yourself watching and admiring a lot of recent examples of horror films from elsewhere, or not so much? And which is it for you?
Yeah, it was a little bit easier when the IMDb horror board was still around before they shut the boards down. And, there were some people, when they shut down the IMDb boards, they just said good riddance because of the trolls, but I disagreed. I got a lot of value out of those boards. And one of those boards was the horror board. And it was very easy to track international films that were, coming up. Some guy from somewhere be like, hey, I watched this new horror film from this place. Check it out. And I easily track them. Now, without that board, it's harder to do it for me. So I'm trying to, there's one YouTuber I found called Spooky Astronauts, and she does a lot of horror films. She's based out of Australia, and I'm using her a lot more now to kind of track which of those international films from various countries I should seek out. And it's getting a little bit easier again with her assistance. But yeah, I'll watch horror from anywhere. But the thing is, a lot of times in October, I've been focusing on so many older films, like the Hammer films. I hammered out I hammered out the Hammer films last year, like all the Dracula, Frankenstein, Mummy films. And then this year I'm doing the Universal Monster set. So I've kind of put off some of the recent horror films from other countries internationally, maybe the last 2-3 years. So I'm going to have to do that maybe next year. I'll get a whole list of stuff together for next year's horror October challenge, kind of pack it in and knock a lot of those out.
And speaking of the films that you have back there behind you, you also mentioned earlier about Carpenter, John Carpenter, and I can't help but notice that box set. That's the limited, now out of print box set, right? The Halloween set behind you.
Yes, that is
Yes.
correct.
Yes, so that's a very good set to have. So I have it too right now. Actually, it's right on the shelf, just off camera. So So I'm assuming
I got
you're yeah.
I got Friday the 13th coming too, so I'll have that one as well.
Oh yes, yes, yes. I'm very excited for that one. That is going to be monumental. Friday the 13th films aren't for everyone, that's for sure. But for if they work for you, then you have to get this set. I think it's going to be historic for reasons which I know that you're already well aware of. So in particular, Friday the 13th Part Two. So but yeah, and uh, what was it? Yes, so Halloween. So could you tell us? So you're a fan of the Halloween films as well?
Yeah, that was the franchise I grew up with, really, in terms of horror films.
Really?
So
Oh,
yeah,
oh,
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
sorry. You go ahead, please. Yes,
So if you want my opinion on some of them, I can give you that.
sure.
There's obviously the original, which is the best. I watched that one. I'm trying to think of when I watched Halloween the first time. I had to have been pretty young. When I was a kid, in the '80s, you watch some dodgy stuff growing up. You get exposed to some dark dark stuff in movies. So I think I watched Halloween pretty early, not excessively early, but early. And then as I was growing up, I was real big on like Halloween 4 and 5, actually, believe it or not. And I'd watch those all the time. I skipped Halloween 3. I remember I was at Blockbuster Video, I'm like, oh, I see Halloween 1, Halloween 2. I'm like, oh, Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. And I turned it around and I'm reading it. And it took me like 10 minutes. And I was like a younger guy. And I'm like, I don't know what's going on. Like, I was so confused. Like, how does this fit in? And I just put it back and I didn't watch it until I got older. But I do like that one. And then I even like part 6. I like part 6, but I prefer the theatrical version just because the death scenes are better. But then after that, I don't even think I liked any of them after part 6. I wasn't really a fan of H2O, not a fan of Resurrection really that much. The zombie ones are, and then the recent one I didn't even really like. So it's been a while. I think they kind of drained the holiday out of the movies. The movies are called Halloween. I don't feel like they focus on the holiday enough anymore. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. Oh, I'm sorry. And what was your take on the on you mentioned Halloween 4 and Halloween 5? In that you do you still like those films or?
Yeah, yeah, I still like them. Yeah, I do. They just have I don't know, there's something about them. Well, obviously Halloween 5, I remember
Yeah.
I snuck a peek of it because my brothers were watching it when I was a little kid or younger, and I ran in and it was the scene with the laundry chute near the end, and I'll never forget that. I saw like maybe 10 seconds of that before they kicked me out of the room. So that it's like scenes like that. I think that work for me.
Oh, because that's one that I think has grown on me very much so. I think it has a very interesting narrative structure. The way it starts, it follows through, and how it ends. It's actually a very interesting way that it tries to resolve certain things. Right. I'm talking about the fifth one, and the like. I think for me, I was I was a kid. I think it was the first three that really did it for me, and I'm I go back and forth actually, but uh, I think when I was I think Halloween scared me, and Halloween 2 very much scared me. I was I, I I still remember that those that's one of the scariest films for me because as I say I saw it very young,
Mm.
and it was really an outstandingly terrifying. Just the way that the scares, all the jump scares would just get you, and the real. I mean, Michael is a very cruel character to begin with, but in Halloween 2, he seems to be particularly cruel in terms of the way he carries out his acts. So, oh, that's really That's really great. And then Halloween, of course, and the John Carpenter connection. So, and you had mentioned Carpenter before. So, what were are there other Carpenter films for you? I know we've spoken also about Carpenter a little bit, and I'm a big fan of Carpenter. And so, what are some of the examples of Carpenter for you that you particularly like?
Well, the two films I've seen the most in my entire life are probably Halloween and Big Trouble in Little China, baby. Big Trouble in Little China. I watched that movie on a loop when I was a kid, just constantly, just over and over and over again. And I still watch it multiple times a year. It's just phenomenal. And that was before, obviously I was a fan of, the Hong Kong stuff, the Kung Fu stuff that he was referencing in that. But man, movie's got a nice blend of just everything in there. Kurt Russell's just in top form, and yeah, that's a big one. I also Halloween, Big Trouble in Little China, They Live is pretty sweet. I really like that one. I just recently rewatched The Fog, and that one continues to grow on me. And then there's just The Thing, obviously too. I mean, that's a phenomenal movie. So yeah, Carpenter, obviously Argento and Carpenter went on like real hot streaks during their primes. I mean, you just can't go wrong with a lot of their stuff. That's why they're pretty high on my favorites list.
Yeah, that's right, and they have right as you alluded to, certain areas of their filmographies, respectively, are generally considered their heights or their peaks. And I think for a number of people, maybe certain other later parts of their filmographies might be considered somewhat of how should I put it, maybe not necessarily reaching the same heights as maybe some of their earlier masterworks did, but still they both have very full and engaging filmographies, each in his own specific ways. So, and then you mentioned Big Trouble in Little China, which is great, and you had seen that, and then you were able to discover the the films that they were maybe referencing either directly or indirectly. But I really love Big Trouble in Little China for many reasons. In particular, the way that I love how the depiction of Chinese American community here is on the one hand it's kind of in the forefront, but on the other hand it doesn't matter because it's so ingrained in the story that it doesn't need to be the focus of the story. You know what I mean? Of course this community, and it's multifaceted, and I like how there is a sense of an Americanness, and people are proud to be an American, and that's I think Wang and Jack Burton, and Wang in particular, he's very proud to be an American. And also there's this talk about China and what China means to them, Egg Shen and what China means to him, and I remember Egg says, China's in the heart, Jack, and wherever I go, she's with me, which I think is a very profound. It's a short but very profound statement, which is like it's just it's an idea, but it also could be interpreted to mean that she is with me, but at the same time I am here in America. And so I think there is this really subtle way that it's dealing with identity and place, and which is I think very fundamentally important. But at the same time, the film doesn't stop to really just pat itself on the back, if you will, for trying to draw attention to this, but rather it's just going along with the story and entertainment, which is I think what it does really well. So it does so many things so subtly and so almost invisibly, but it does. It's all there, and you can enjoy the film picking up those moments or maybe focusing on other moments. But there's just so much for everyone, with that film. And so I'm so glad you mentioned that. That's one for me too. I can watch and forever. I can watch forever. If someone asked me if I could bring one film with me to a desert island, I don't know what I would say, but Big Trouble in Little China could be a top contender in that. I'm not sure, but that's certainly what I forgot to ask you. I'm glad you brought up Big Trouble in Little China, though. But that let me just return the conversation a little bit back to your Asian film exploration, which is you mentioned a little bit about martial arts films. Since we know Big Trouble in Little China, I think owes a lot to the martial arts tradition. Uh, what are some of the martial arts films for you in particular that you find yourself really fond of?
Yeah, one of the big ones that is a little bit older is a film called Heroes of the East, which kind of has a nice mix. It's about like a mixed marriage between I think a Chinese guy and a Japanese girl, and they have a conflict of their martial arts, which are better, and it like kind of blows up into a conflict. But that one was really good, Heroes of the East, because you get a lot of different forms and stuff that are shown, really engaging stuff. Obviously, you have some of the obvious stuff from Jackie Chan. A lot of his stuff is just top notch. A lot of the stuff I like too is stuff from the 80s and 90s that blend martial arts into urban settings, like cop films. You know, like you'd have something like Police Story, but those girls with guns movies. There's a series called the In the Line of Duty franchise, and the first one was called Yes, Madam, and it had Michelle Yeoh and Cynthia Rothrock. And and you have the final fight in that movie. It's just a fantastic exhibition of martial arts, even though the film is really kind of like a crime action flick. And I like it when martial arts are blended with gunplay and other kinds of action. And you'll see in those movies, the In the Line of Duty movies, maybe somebody will have a gun and there'll be like a gunfight, and then they'll get disarmed, and then it'll turn into a martial arts fight, which I always found to be a really interesting way to structure an action scene. And obviously you have the recent examples from Indonesia, the Raid films, in the night comes for us, that are really must sees as well. So every kind of actually, that's one thing I wish Japan would kind of mine more, because they do a lot of their swordplay films in the samurai era, and occasionally they have a Sakaguchi film that comes out. But I kind of hope they would do more like the urban. Maybe use some Japanese martial arts in there, like a cop film in urban Tokyo or something. And I would like to see more of those flicks. That would really interest me.
That's an interesting concept. I was trying to think, are there any examples of that? But that's very interesting. I never really thought of it like that before, but you may be onto something there. I'm oh, that's really interesting. Maybe you should try to make proposals, maybe in terms of producing in the Japanese film industry. There might be some there might be some interesting prospects there, I suppose. And the that's so that this is so this this is also related not just to martial arts films. It is, but it's also related to other films. I think Hong Kong films come to mind as, for me, the prime example of my next question to you, which is when you watch films, what versions do you try to watch? In what language do you prefer to watch some of these films? And do you try to find all of the different cuts of a particular film where those versions or cuts are available? And I mention this because this happens a lot from films from the Hong Kong film industry, especially from a certain period. But how do you try to handle this particular area of film consumption, which can, I think, admittedly, in many instances, be a little bit tricky to navigate? So, what versions do you usually find yourself relying on in terms of language, in terms of release versions, and how do you deal with this issue of trying to get all the particular release versions where possible?
Yeah, I would say that I always try to find the original cut of the film in its original language. Although sometimes they'll dub it, after the fact, which could be a little problematic. Like for example, So Close from 2002, the cheesy Hong Kong action flick that I like so much. They did it almost giallo style, where they had different actors speaking their own languages, and then they would just dub it over the languages that weren't spoken. So there'd be like a Mandarin dub, a Cantonese dub, and an English language dub. But on that one, I choose the Mandarin dub because Zhao Wei and Shu Qi and Carrie Mock all spoke Mandarin on set. So it just made more sense to use the Mandarin in that one. But in terms of, in most cases, I would, for a Hong Kong action flick, I try to find the Cantonese dub with English subtitles, uncut. And that could be a problem for some category 3 films that have some pretty excessive stuff in it. But I always try to find the uncut versions whenever I can. And and the other thing is sometimes beggars can't be choosers. So sometimes I just got to take what I can get. If there's sometimes some of my movies aren't really available in Blu-ray format. So I can't really, I can't hold out for a Blu-ray because I might never get a Blu-ray release. I recently watched a film called He Lives by Night from 1982, a Hong Kong giallo film that was kind of an homage to the Italian stuff, and it was also a comedy at the same time. It was a fantastic movie, but I just got like it was the Region 1 release from Fortune Star DVD, and I doubt anybody will ever release that on Blu-ray, but who knows. So I gotta just take what I can get sometimes, Daisuke.
Yeah, but that's a really great point, and I think also I know a lot of people feel the same way, and sometimes we just have to wait and hope that companies can release maybe comprehensive sets. It's obviously not going to be everything that exists out there, but something is better than nothing at all. So I guess we can wait for companies like, I don't know, like I get like Criterion, I suppose, doing what they do with say the Bruce Lee box set or the Godzilla set from a year or so back, and then I suppose I get the heavily rumored Wong Kar-wai set, which is almost certain to come. It's I guess just a matter of timing it because of the release of the restorations the end of this year, and then that usually means that everyone's speculating that it'll be. I thought it would be maybe at the end of this year, but I can speculate that maybe due to pandemic related situations, maybe the schedule was pushed into 2021, which is completely understandable. But and then of course others. So we have to rely on labels like this to try to release as much as possible. But it's still impossible to get everything. It's great. But I guess speaking of versions, I don't know. Who do you think is the best label out there at the moment who is releasing a lot of these films, the Asian films? What are the best labels that people who might be watching this, who might be trying to get into this area of cinema for the first time? What labels do you think they should be paying attention to the most in terms of what's available now, from your perspective?
Yeah, in recent years, I have been paying a little bit more attention to labels. I never really used to, outside of maybe Criterion, because they were so in the forefront, talked about so much. Because a lot of times I use a sniper method where I just want the movie. I don't care where it's where it's released or who released it, to be honest. But in recent years, I have been kind of following it a little bit more, and obviously watching certain YouTube channels that follow it a lot. I'm getting a little bit more of a knowledge. And I think Arrow is been doing a really good job in terms of some newer stuff and a lot of like the older stuff as well. Although I always sometimes lose track of who released what, but I know they released a bunch of like really good stuff, especially for Japanese films. I don't think really anybody's really stepped up on the Hong Kong scene as much as I would like to have seen in recent years. Hopefully somebody will start putting like box sets together of like, maybe the lesser known stuff. But we'll have to see. But yeah, I think Arrow is a good one to keep track of.
Yeah, and I suppose uh, yeah, they've released a number of films. Oh, I guess I'm sorry. Yeah, that I was thinking of Arrow, and there are some sets there, like Jiajiangke, or I was thinking also of there. I mean, there's some sets. What are like the Seijin Suzuki sets, The Ring, etc. The Yoshida set, the Jisoji set. I think are real standouts in my opinion. The Taisho trilogy set also is a real standout in my opinion. But what about mainland China, cinema of mainland China? Like how many are you well versed in mainland China films?
Yeah, there's well, especially in the last decade, mainland China has, I guess, exerted a little bit more influence on the Hong Kong film industry, and there's more co-productions. There's more talent being taken from Hong Kong that are doing mainland Chinese films. But even back in the day, I would watch some. Well, one of my favorite films of all time is a film called Green Tea from 2003, with Zhao Wei and Wen Zhang, who co-starred with Donnie Yen in Rogue One. He was Donnie Yen's buddy. And that movie, Green Tea, is my favorite romance film of all time. And that's a mainland Chinese film. So, and good luck finding that on a streaming site, by the way. You're not going to really find it. But yeah, that's a big one. And I used to watch some other ones, some of Yimou Zhang's films, from the 80s and 90s. Stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff with Gong Li, who worked with him. There's some other stuff that kind of flies under the radar, and I actually think Chinese cinema is a little bit underappreciated as well. I mean, you have someone like these, I guess you could call them art house directors, that are doing some really cool stuff, but they also make some like pretty cool like thriller films too, like kind of lower key thriller stuff. Like The Looming Storm was really good. There was one called No Man's Land that was pretty cool. So you could kind of find genre films within China nowadays too, as well as like the art house stuff that they were originally kind of known for back in the day. So I do kind of like following it as best that I can, especially since some of my favorite actresses, like Zhou Xun is probably my favorite actress ever, and she did a lot of Chinese stuff. So I like to try to keep up with it.
Oh, that's great. And what are some of the particular gems from your standpoint from this area of the world, the cinema from this area of the world, that you think that people who, as I say, may be watching this and maybe who are trying to either get into more Asian cinema, whatever the particular country may be, of course, because it's all. I mean, I use the term Asian cinema, but as you know, it's a very of an incredibly complex and many places in this part of the world, obviously. And so, but where do you think? What for you would be some of the recent releases that you think people should be paying more attention to in terms of films that maybe are maybe underappreciated and films that you really want to champion and let people know about? What could you give us some examples of these?
Oh, sure. I have my little spreadsheet open right now, just in case we were to ask that question. So let me just sort it here, because this is how I track my movies, Daisuke. I have an Excel spreadsheet, and it has all the movies that I've seen. So let's just go back 5 years here and see what I find here. So I'm thinking, if you want some good recent stuff, I mean, One Cut of the Dead from Japan, really big time film. A lot of people have probably seen that already. Let's see here. Scroll down to Japan. I mean, that's a big one that needs to be seen. Hanagatami is a recent release from Nobuhiko Obayashi. That's a really good one. We Are Little Zombies from 2019. Very interesting film. It's like a coming of age film. And 37 Seconds. It's available on Netflix US. 37 Seconds is a film about a girl with cerebral palsy. And I think it's up there with Oasis from South Korea in terms of kind of tackling that issue. So that's definitely totally worth watching. And again, a lot of these I reviewed on my channel, so they could find some reviews on these there, spoiler free. Just last week, I saw a Korean zombie film called Alive that was pretty interesting. Does things a little bit differently. Cool movie. From last year, Exit from Korea, which is about, you might like this one, Daisuke. It's about a tanker truck full of like toxic gas that like blows up and gets released in the city of Seoul. And you have these two characters who are like hikers who like hike, and they use their hiking skills to scale the buildings because the fog continues to rise. That's a pretty cool flick. I like that one a lot. And then in terms of like China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, we got a movie called Man Monsters from Taiwan. That's a horror film that was really actually quite interesting. And some of the art house stuff from mainland China. Long Day's Journey into Night, really interesting if you're into that kind of thing. Ash's Purest White. And then, it's a few recommendations for you.
That is just utterly splendid, my friend. Utterly splendid. I am just continuing to be impressed with your enthusiasm, the great enthusiast that you are. And I often call you my dear friend and sensei. Sensei is the word for teacher. And so I think you continue to show me just many examples of why I think that's an appropriate label to bestow upon you, my friend, because you are such a great sensei. I really, really love this. This is just so helpful to me and so valuable that I'm having such a great time with this conversation. I guess you spoke then about your channel too, and let's go back to your channel. And we started. I asked you about your channel at the start of this conversation. Let's go back to this now, which is, as you say, many of these films. I guess all of the films that you've spoken about, you have a review or discussion video on your channel. Is that correct?
Quite a few. Yeah, the easiest way to kind of explore my channel is playlists. Every video I have is in a playlist. And there's not that many of them. So, just go to the playlist channel. I have reviews, separate review videos. And then I have list videos or, project stuff like the Takashi Miike playlist or like the Asian horror playlist. And then I'm also doing like 200 Japanese film recommendations from the last 100 years is a playlist too. So they're addressed somewhere in a playlist somewhere.
And you've mentioned also that you will be doing something for Halloween, Halloween themed videos tied to the season, because we're of course entering the season as of the time of this video recording. So we're in the middle part of September, maybe close to the latter half of September. So we're about to enter into October 2020. So of course that means Halloween is just around the corner. Are there any other plans or projects or videos that you have planned and upcoming for us to be looking forward to?
Yes, I have there's definitely going to be a physical media update video, like an addendum video with the horror movies that I picked up throughout the year. There's going to be an addendum to my Asian horror playlist where I kind of review some films that maybe I missed previously when I covered the years, because I cover them chronologically. So I'm going to do an addendum to that, cover some of those. And then there's I'm covering individual films that I want to highlight. Anytime I see a good Asian horror film nowadays, a new one, I do a separate review of it. So I'm already kind of caught up. Well, not quite. There's a few new ones I'm planning on reviewing, but I'm gonna select a few older ones that I just want to highlight. And some of those are going to be the Whispering Corridors franchise from South Korea. There's 5 films there, so I'm reviewing all 5 in separate reviews. I really want to dig into those again. And then a handful of like Japanese stuff and Hong Kong stuff I'm going to pepper in as well. And and I'm also doing a top 10 list of like 10 Asian horror films from like the last decade you should check out, with like availability information for each of them.
Sorry about this. Oh, very interesting. Oh, uh, that my goodness, you obviously put in a lot of, you have a lot of videos on your channel and a lot of different projects and playlists and things that are ongoing in terms of your YouTube projects. So that's a lot. And then you watch the films too, and then you also have your day job. That's a lot. I'm very impressed with how well you are balancing and juggling all these different hats at once.
Well, when I first started my channel, I already figured it all out in terms of my strategy. I said I'm going to have minimal editing, minimal footage. In my longer videos, I'll splice in screen caps or like posters, just kind of mix it up visually.
Yeah.
But when I start, I'm like, listen, I'm just going to do the old school YouTube 2007 format of just sitting in front of the camera and talking. And that allows me to get in 3 videos a week, and that's more, I guess it plays more to my I guess strengths, because I have a lot of weaknesses, but my strengths are the amount of movies I've seen, and that plays to that, where I could cover more of them that with that format. So that's kind of how I do it, really.
Incidentally, while we're on the topic, when you prepare your comments like that, do you prepare a script or prepare notes from which you uh, read and make your videos, or are the comments more off the cuff and on the spot, or is it a mixture of the two?
Yeah, it's mostly scripted. So I don't put a lot of emphasis on the back end, the post production, but I do put a little bit more on the pre production of the video. So a lot of them are scripted, and I think I kind of like presenting. That happened in college, where once I got to college, I had a little bit of a joy of presenting stuff. So like in front of like a classroom, and that's kind of the format I kind of do, just kind of like presentation where I'm just standing there talking to you. But a few of my stuff isn't scripted, like my DVD, Blu-ray collection videos are not, and it's a little bit different, a little bit less focused. Because if I don't write a script and I record the video, I'm like, oh, I wish I would have said this, and I didn't get the point across, So I kind of have to.
Yeah, I am. I'm very. How should I put it? Also doing YouTube stuff. I am quite. I'm quite amazed at these particular comments that you're making, because that takes a lot of time and energy and effort. It really does. And to actually try to to make these preparations and then to try to deliver them in this discussion format, and also to watch the films and then to try to make sure you get all the things that you want to say. I've been there, because there's always this little pressure about trying to catch everything, and then not necessarily, maybe you miss something and, oh, what am I going to do? I missed this. I really should have said something about this. But it just, sometimes it slips the mind. And so yeah, sometimes you just one needs to be able to make sure that they have everything ready. So that's really, that is that's so great. I'm so excited for these upcoming plans that you have on your YouTube channel. Um, this is going to be really, it's just an exciting month, an exciting rest of the year. So, and especially in a year where we've had a lot of bad things happen, we need some positive things. And I think your YouTube channel provides a lot of positive energy for a lot of people out there, including myself. So I speak for a lot of people when I say that we are really grateful, and I'm really grateful for all the work and all the time and effort and energy that you really put into this, and trying to just tell us and show us the passion that you have, and why it is you are the Asian movie enthusiast, because that's who you are, right?
Yeah, thank you. If I could, I just want to be somewhat useful to people. And the channel is kind of useful. You can find some stuff that you might want to watch, and that's, I'm happy about that.
That's just great. That is really great. And yeah, I have to thank you also, because you are so kind, and you come to my channel and you leave comments behind, and you do so for other channels as well. So you are a really wonderful, great uh, member and leader, and you set such a great example in terms of how to do this stuff on YouTube. So, while I have you here, I just want to thank you very much for being such a great example of how to do it right, and how to engage with everyone about a topic that this topic of cinema that you obviously love with such a great passion. So I really want to thank you very much for that.
Yes, well, thank you. It's a lot of it is part of the community too. I've done a good number of collaborations, and that's what kind of makes it fun, as well as kind of the interaction and the discussion that results in stuff. And I find that I learn a lot by doing the YouTube stuff. It makes me reassess stuff. It makes me see things from like a different angle, and I'm like, oh man, I never really thought of things that way before. So it's very beneficial all around.
Yeah, but what you do, you really go in places that I find amazing, which are, I mean, you mentioned in passing your playlists, for instance, on your channel, Miike, the films of Miike, and uh, I I don't know how many, I don't know if there are a lot of people who are able to do what it is you're able to do with the works of Miike. I'm very impressed with that, and because Miike's filmography is quite, as you know, it's probably one of the most daunting and quite intimidating aspects. It's very exciting, don't get me wrong, but just the sheer volume of things that exist make it probably one of the most intimidating aspects of cinema out there. And I think your handling of it was just superb.
Yeah, yeah. Like that's the type of projects I like to do, where it'd be like, well, has someone on YouTube done this before? And if I can't find it, then maybe I'll try to do it, just to I guess provide something that hasn't been provided before. But my reviews are pretty. I mean, they're pretty basic, really. They're not. I don't think they're critic level. They're not the level that you would get from a Tom Mess book. Like Agitator, the cinema of Takashi Miike. Like that's legit, like critic level. And there's some YouTubers out there. There's a channel called Cinema Nippon that does like I guess detailed reviews of Japanese films, and they really get into the dirt. You know what I mean? Really, really grind out all the themes and stuff. Whereas I do kind of non-spoilerish, higher level stuff, but that means I could do a Miike playlist where I could go and I could show you the whole process of his, the trends of his whole career, certain phases of his career, and give you recommendations kind of along the way. So that's just that's what I like to do. It's like that's where I really like where my interest lies.
Uh, my goodness, I would love to have a conversation with you about Miike. I think that we need another day, another week, I think, about that. But I guess in the interest of time, maybe we can save that for another occasion, if you don't mind. Maybe you can come back and we can talk about. I mean, you mentioned Kurosawa, Kiyoshi, and you Pulse, Kairo, and but we didn't necessarily talk about his filmography as much. I'm a big fan of the works of Kurosawa. I think there's something very there's something very fundamentally eerie about what he's able to accomplish, or the things that he captures in cinema. So maybe we can save that also for another occasion, because I know that you have a lot to say about that. But in the interest of time, and we just in Miike, because Miike is also one of the places that I really love, but I do find it very daunting. What are some of the Miike films that you would you find in particular that are worth mentioning and recommending?
Well, Miike, yeah. So if you want, I think I'm going to
Or
try to do
should
this
I
real
should
hand.
I is that a difficult question? I don't know.
No, no, you could. There's obviously you want to go to different sections of his career because his career, is you get different stuff. So say an earlier one, if you want to do an earlier one, you could try to find Fudo, The New Generation is big for me. It's one of my favorites of his whole filmography. And you get that craziness you typically get with Miike, but it's also really, really well made. You might want to go with something that's not so crazy to mix it up. And I would definitely recommend The Bird People in China, which is really high quality drama. It's practically a family film. You can watch it like with the whole family. And then obviously Audition is big. Dead or Alive Part 2 is one of my favorites. Ichi the Killer. And if you go a little bit after that, this is where people kind of lose touch with some of his films, is like in the mid to late 2000s. But I would say something like Box from Three Extremes, really interesting. If you can track it down, if people can track it down, he did a movie in 2006 called Scars of the Sun with Sho Aikawa. And it's a real nasty, like intense revenge movie that I think is really good. We need a release of that in the US. And then obviously you get 13 Assassins. It's good. But I think a lot of his stuff in the last decade was actually pretty solid. I do see a lot of criticism of it online. But from the last decade, I really enjoyed Lesson of the Evil. Really interesting. Over Your Dead Body, which is almost like the styling of retelling the Yotsuya ghost legend in a modern setting and having that juxtaposition with the visuals is great. And then obviously First Love is one that kind of a lot of people have seen recently, but definitely I would recommend that one. So there's a lot to watch from Miike.
And I know you've done this conversation maybe on your own and or in collaboration with other fans, but I didn't even get the chance to ask you about this, and so maybe we'll have to. I must have you back and discuss Sono, the works of Sion Sono, or Sono Shion. And I mean, unfortunately, we didn't even mention, but this is one that his works mean quite a lot to me, and I haven't spoken at all about the works of Sono. But could you let us know, just in case anyone who is watching us doesn't know your take on the works of what is your view on the works of Sono?
I really enjoy his stuff. I mean, some of his earlier stuff's kind of hard to find. I think a
Yeah.
few of them are actually on YouTube, actually, some of his earlier stuff, which were lower budget, art house fare, for lack of a better term. And then he started getting into the horror stuff with Suicide Club, Strange Circus, which I love. But man, you got to be careful watching that movie because it could be a little offensive. So be careful with Strange Circus out there, but I definitely recommend that one. And then Love Exposure was big. And at the time, I was a little disappointed that he was moving away from horror because he did Suicide Club, Strange Circus, and X-Day, or Hair Extensions. And they're like, oh, he's going to do this like drama, 4-hour drama. And I'm like, oh, no, I don't know. And then Love's Exposure was awesome. And he's continued to make interesting stuff, I think. Even some of his dodgier stuff, like Guilty of Romance, is interesting to watch. And my personal favorite, I think, of his whole filmography could be Tag from 2015. That's just like 80 minutes of just nonstop awesome. It's just so phenomenal. I love Tag so much. And well, why don't you Play in Hell as another highlight?
Yeah. Oh my goodness, I have to have you back because this is great. This is so great. I'm this is like my sort of cloud nine, so to speak, or it's just my goodness, we must have you back, and we can continue this conversation and really just go into specifics here. And I know, of course, that you've already done this on your channel and in collaboration with others. So, and if anyone who's watching this hasn't seen your discussions on some of these filmmakers or some of these films that you've mentioned, then I would just encourage you to go to Erik's channel, the Asian Movie Enthusiast, and you can, of course, see his videos, or you can find ways to go to his collaborations there or on other channels. And so I really encourage that very much. So, Erik, would it be okay if you can come back to this channel and we can continue this conversation?
Yeah. I'm always available. I'm always available to you, buddy. Always.
Oh, you're the best. You are the absolute best. Because this is right. My goodness, I have just so many things to say, but I suppose there are a lot of things that I think we have in common, and there are a lot of films too that I choose not to talk about necessarily on my channel because of their lack of availability. And there are a lot of films, in particular Japanese films. I don't consider myself a Japanese film expert, but there are a lot of films that I love in Japanese cinema, as an example, that aren't even available outside of Japan. Heck, I don't think a lot of people in Japan watch a lot of these films. And so this is one of those things. But there are so many films that I would just love to ask you about and get your reaction to. I'm a particular fan of what's known as the Art Theater Guild films from Japan, the ATG works, and so I'd love to get your takes on some of these. These are the some films have been released in the United States or outside of Japan, like the Yoshida films, for instance. Like Eros Plus Massacre or something like that. Mm-hmm. Although that's actually a little bit of the classification of that is a little bit. It's a little bit. There are a lot of asterisks and footnotes on that in comparison with ATG. That's not a good example, but that genre of films, let me put it that way, is the type of films that I'm really into. But most of them haven't been released. So. But I think you know a lot about them already because we've spoken about them maybe off camera. So you know a lot about them already. So I'd love to get your takes on these one of these days. Maybe we can have a nice proper discussion next time and pick a few filmmakers or subgenres, and you can share with us your particular insights about those and other things. So would that be okay, yeah. Erik, my friend? Is that okay? We'll have to do this again, maybe hopefully in the coming month or so, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we could pick a little segment and then just get a little list of movies together and just talk about them and see what's going on there. And I do have one music recommendation that I have to get out there, Daisuke. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with them. There's a Japanese rock band called Band Maid, M-A-I-D, and they sing westernized, basically Western hard rock music. It's an all-woman band, and they're phenomenal. And I've seen them live like 3 times when they came to the U.S. So if anybody wants a good example of like a younger band, like they're in in the late 20s and they can play their instruments really well, and you like that hard rock type vibe, I recommend Bandmade.
Eric, thank you so much. Thank you so much, my dear friend. And one of these days, when all this terrible health crisis stuff is behind us, which I hope is soon. I don't know if it's going to be soon. I hope it's soon, but when it is, and if and when we can start to travel again, then we really must meet in person and have another sushi lunch or sushi dinner, or anything.
I'll buy you
Yeah, anything
some.
in that matter. That's fine. It doesn't have to be sushi, of course.
I'll buy you some uni. I'll give you some uni if you show up. I'll give you a piece of uni and a piece of toro. How about that?
Oh, that's the expensive stuff.
Oh, that's the
I'd be
best one.
I'd be very honored, my friend. I'd be very honored, and we can have a drink or two or more, and we can discuss the merits of cinema. Right, all cinema, great and small. So I've loved the opportunity, my friend. But in the meantime, Zoom meetings like this will more than suffice for me, because this has been an absolute delight and pleasure for me to be able to talk with you today, my friend. Thank you so much.
I love talking about stuff like this. It's great.
And my dear friends, everyone who's watching, so if you don't know Erik's channel, then check out the Asian Movie Enthusiast channel. The information will be in the description box below. Are there any other places, Erik, that people can find you, or is the main place online your YouTube channel?
Yeah, it would be my YouTube channel, I think.
Okay. All right, that's fine, because that's a great place. And as you say, there are many videos that people can watch and playlists and things of that nature. So, my friends, check out Erik's YouTube channel, Asian Movie Enthusiast. Please check out as many videos as possible, comment, subscribe, and support his great channel. And just once again, Erik, thank you so much, and we will talk again very soon. I'm looking forward to it immensely.
Thank you, my friend. See you
Thank
next
you.
time.
Yeah, see you, my friend, and cheers. Thank you.